of anguished back and forth. He pleaded. Annie felt awful. But even in the midst of his pleading, he couldn't resist offering more of his general critique of her, and that made it easier for her, the ending. She left. She took none of the things that they'd accumulated together. The expensive wedding gifts from his kind, moneyed parents and their moneyed friends. The silver vegetable servers with covers. The napkin rings, the fish knives, the linen tablecloth and napkins. She left all of it behind, thinking of it as the price she was paying for her freedom. At the time, she thought there ought to be a price. She felt so guilty, so ashamed of this failure. But she kept the camera his parents had given her when she'd begun to be interested in photography, an expensive Rolleiflex that she'd only slowly learned how to use. That and her books, many of them purchased for courses in college, filled with markings and notes she'd taken in a neat, careful handwriting she could barely recognize as her own. So she was free, at 29, which should have made her feel liberated, expansive, and she did in some ways, except that for a long while after the divorce, she was uncomfortable around men. For at least a year, maybe longer, she read almost every gesture, every remark as controlling, as dangerous for her. But all of that was behind her by the time she met Graham. By then she had shed that sense of danger. She could enjoy men again. And some of that enjoyment was the pleasure of casual sex, something that wouldn't have been possible for her when she emerged from college, when she married at 23. But post-divorce, in a world that had itself changed, Annie learned to sleep around, happily, enthusiastically, fairly indiscriminately, too, so that later she couldn't call up the names of some of the men she'd had sex with. Sometimes, though, at the end of one of these casual relationships, she experienced a kind of melancholy that lingered for days or longer, a sense that, free as she felt she was, pleasurable as she felt that freedom to be, there was part of her that might be hoping for something else, some deeper connection, even, perhaps, monogamy again. She met Graham at a party he was throwing, a party to celebrate the opening of his bookstore. He had been lucky in the weather the night of this party. After several rainy, gray weeks that had darkened the brick sidewalks of Cambridge and depressed everyone, the sky had brightened through the day, and at 5 o'clock it was a lovely late spring evening. People were suddenly out everywhere on the streets, walking, enjoying the benign touch of the air that still carried the scent of the various trees budding and blooming and dropping their pale confetti all over town. Hawthorns, crabapples, lilacs. Annie had ambled slowly over from her attic apartment on Raymond Street with Jeff, someone she slept with from time to time. They'd spent several naked, sweaty hours before this in her bed. The bookstore party had been an afterthought. He'd been invited. Did she feel like going? Why not, she said. Why not was the way she had come to navigate the world then, the way she'd come to understand it in the years since the end of her marriage. There was always the next thing, the next possibility. The man, yes. Sex, yes. But also perhaps just something interesting, something to look at, something to do. They'd showered together, she and Jeff, before they started their stroll down to the bookstore. Annie's long, dark hair was still damp when they left her apartment, though it had dried by the time they arrived. She stepped inside ahead of Jeff, stepped into the store's heat and hubbub, into the heady odor of women's perfume and cigarette smoke, and here and there the whiff of pot. There must have been 60 or 70 people already there, milling around, talking loudly to be heard over some barely audible music playing in the background. The crowd was mostly her age, 30s, 40s. From the moment she entered the room, Annie was excited. She felt sexed, maybe a bit predatory, intensely aware of her body in all of its parts, of her thighs moving against each other, slick and slippery in spite of the shower. When Jeff brought her over to Graham to introduce